Okay, hello everyone. My name is John Lott. I'm Program Director of Architecture at the GSD, and we're fortunate today to have Oana Stănescu as one of our first talks in our new virtual lecture series. Before we start, just a couple of housekeeping notes. Those of you who have been using Zoom lately might notice that this webinar has some different features. Please note that the chat function has been disabled. This is just to allow us to focus on Oana's presentation. Oana will respond to questions as she's finished her lecture, and you're welcome to send questions to her anytime during the lecture by clicking the Q&A button at the top of your Zoom window. Before I turn things over to Oana, I want to mention a couple of upcoming lectures as part of our GSD's newly launched virtual public lecture series. So please mark your calendars for Monday, April 13th, with Leila Khaleli, Professor of International Politics at Queen Mary University in London. And for Friday, April 17th, the architecture duo French 2D. We're fortunate to have Oana Stănescu with us today to share her work. She runs her practice out of New York City. Her projects include the collaborative Plus Pool, a floating water-filled swimming pool, as well as a wide range of collaborations with Nike, Virgil Abloh, the Office of PlayLab, 2x4, Arup, New Museum, Storefront for Art and Architecture, Need Supply, Fool's Gold, and many more. Oana's work has been celebrated in publications such as the New York Times, Forbes, Architect Magazine, New York Magazine, Mark, Time Magazine, Cultured, to name a few. Prior to establishing her own studio, she was co-founder of the New York-based practice Family. Oana has taught architecture previously at MIT, Columbia University, the Cooper Union Architectural Association in London, in addition to lecturing in places like Princeton University, Sciarc, and universities in Memphis, Florida, Arizona, as well as Women in Design Denver, Neocon and AIA Chicago, or Design Miami, in collaboration with the UN. And now we're fortunate to have her teaching with us at the GSD. Some of her current projects are in New York, Romania, Southeast Asia, and Canada. Before I turn the time over to Oana, I just want to mention my impression of her work. I think of Oana as an incredibly prolific early practitioner. And I don't mean that just because she's young. She's so accomplished. It's more so that she is concerned with the now, I think. She is connected with the current pop and niche culture alike. And the work is highly intuitive, playful, yet direct. I think her work takes pleasure in the ambiguities between these two poles. Very few practitioners in architecture are able to maintain this attitude of earliness. And I think that's what makes Oana's work so remarkable and such value to us. Please join me in welcoming Oana Stănescu.
That's where I was muted. Thank you, John. Thank you so much for having me today. I also want to thank the GSD faculty for the invitation. Also the GSD student body and community at large. It's turned out to be an incredibly resilient collective, and I'm glad to be able to write this moment in time out with everyone. I also want to thank everyone from behind the stage, so Matthew, Patrick, Paige, Ken, for allowing us to come together and to still organize events, allowing us to come together, even if it's in a different form than usually. This takes a lot of work and I really appreciate it. But most of all, I want to also thank everyone joining me today at this lunch hour. It's I think if I learned anything in the last couple of weeks is that time spent in company, and particularly in good company, is extremely precious. So I really truly want to thank you for that. Now, this is not exactly how I imagined to ever be lecturing at Harvard GSD, and that's in many ways still the least awkward thing about, or the least strange thing about today. And lecturing in general, it's funny because it can be terrifying in person. You just stare at a bunch of faces. I never thought it could be actually even more even harder when you're by yourself, when you don't have the faces to communicate with. And the format itself lends itself to become a monologue. But I think today more than ever, we are more in need of dialogues instead. So what I'll try to do is let's just present you the kind of work that you might be familiar with, or also try to tell you the kind of nice, smooth, slick story of what I have done so far. But instead, try to make this a more collaborative thing. So try to open my practice to you and show you work in progress. Show you the questions that kind of keep me up at night and the questions that I'm struggling with, and then I keep asking myself and keep trying to push forward, and hope that especially in the Q&A afterwards we're able to have a proper dialogue. So I'll start now by sharing my presentation. 1 second. See how we write out these technicalities. All right. There we go. Okay, so we can start. So my name is Oana Stănescu, as John very gracefully introduced me. You're gonna get a sense of my background. And this is just kind of a screenshot of my website. So some of my previous work was done as a collaborative called Family. So I'll just quickly zoom through some of these projects. The beginning of my practice was very much based on competitions, doing things like, for example, the Circle Bridge, or the competition for a church in Denmark, which we designed as an open church, which can be closed in winter, weather permitting, also be opened completely to become part of the city, become a true public place and space, or Gosta Museum, which allows a walk through nature as much as it allows a walk through galleries, or some of the build work done, for example, for Need Supply in Richmond, Virginia, where there was a strong need for a community to gather, but also to be able to have a very dense display for archival almost model of product. Just a couple of shots of the build things, and this is how it was during the opening party, enabling really people to come together and really making for a great place to party, essentially. Fool's Gold, that's in Brooklyn, or a lot of the Off-White stores. This was the first one in Hong Kong 4 or 5 years ago, which seems a whole different century, if you ask me. That's where it all started. From there, going to Off-White Singapore and Tokyo, and many more, from Milan to New York to Hong Kong to Toronto. But really, the place where I wanted to start was a project that I've been working on for about 3 years ago. To be fair, I think it's around 3 years and 3 months almost to the day, and it's when I was diagnosed with lung cancer. And I know it's a hectic time. We don't need any more negative news. So I want to start by saying that I'm in good health and I'm incredibly lucky to have come out of it for the better. But also that it's an experience without which I cannot imagine myself anymore at this point. The reason I bring this up and the reason why I wanted to talk about it is, or maybe before that, actually, I also do want to acknowledge Harvard GSD's Dean Sarah Whiting's journey in facing the same illness, and the strength that it required, the strength that lies in that vulnerability of acknowledging that and starting that journey. The reason I wanted to talk about it is this particular moment in time that we're experiencing now in the last month has really reminded me of that moment. And partially there's two elements that are very synonymous with it to me. And one is the lack of control, understanding how little control we have for some of the most important or momentous elements in our life, truly. And that's a hard lesson to learn. The second one is the inability to make plans, not really knowing when normal is going to be, when you're going to be back to a new normal, and or how that normal is going to look like. To my doctor's despairs, I was very interested. So the other thing that happens is when you're confronted with something like this, you're going through all sorts of strange kind of medical examinations. So what you see on the screen is me, more that you bargained for, inside out. And for the first time, my body was being subjected to the same operations that I typically subject my projects to, so plans and sections. So these are sectional cuts, PT or CT scans, that were taken through my body over 2 millimeters in both directions. My doctor was absolutely horrified by my fascinations of them, but I thought it was really something interesting and also something truly insightful to realize in an almost perverse way that that's all there is, that's all you are. There's no mystery to it. Of course, what that meant too is, these are just some more of those scans. That meant too, though, in dealing with lung cancer, that I had to start learning or pay attention to what my body was or was doing. And I will say I was very ignorant prior. So today we talk a lot about lungs and we read a lot about it in the news. But in simple terms, the lungs are made out of 5 lobes, three on the right side, 2 on the left side. 2 on the left side because they make room for the heart. And this was an X-ray taken in the hospital shortly after the lobectomy, after surgery. Basically, what you see here, the proportions between the lungs, so from being bigger on the right side, has apologies, I have to figure out these mouse things. Okay, the proportions had changed. So basically this became a big vacuum where parts of the lungs were being taken out. This asymmetry was driving me crazy. I think my architectural brain really wanted symmetry back. But then again, you were never quite symmetrical. But the reason I'm saying all of this is I spend a lot of time then trying to process all of these things that I was going through, but also try to share the lessons that I was going through with the wider universe. And this is a project that takes me way out of my comfort zone. It's a project which fails me in many ways because every time I try to make drawings or models, it's a project that doesn't live in any typical format that I'm used to. But instead, I found that writing and really going back to memories and moments in time is the only way I'm able to process or kind of help this project come to life. So it actually will be published in the next issue of the Badland magazine, which is a magazine for Balkanic culture. And it's and I realized actually in writing this article, it was the best way in which the project was able to come together. So the project's ambition is the exploration of the universally human through the tremble at the heart of our existence, the breath, something that's incredibly simple, but it's also something that's synonymous with life and that's deeply tied to the expression of all humans' emotions of states of mind. And that's something that I found incredibly fascinating. These are Paul Ekman's studies of facial expressions, but literally every intellectual, emotional, rational change that you're experiencing is reflected in your breath. And sometimes we're aware of it, sometimes when we do yoga or exercise, but really yawning or clearing your throat or thinking or singing or whispering or thinking about something or really being in another body's presence, they all impact dramatically how we breathe. And we tend not to pay attention to something like this. And, you know, one of the earliest memories that I have of understanding there's something there that's a little bit bigger than us was back in high school. This is a picture of a lion that I had, which sounds weird. Not everyone in Romania has lions in high school. And just as a disclaimer, we did save it from my brother essentially brought it home from the zoo where the lioness had given birth without anyone knowing that she was pregnant. So there was a little brother involved too that didn't make it. At that point, we jumped in and tried to kind of save the lion cub. And what was interesting about, so we named her Simba. We tried really hard not to name her Simba, which is maybe why we failed and ended up naming her Simba. But while I play this home video from the 90s, and you know, when all else fails, you just kind of show what happened the first night, he brought her home. I was actually lying in this bed, and what we did as a bed for her is we made a box and filled it with bottles with really hot water, and put some blankets over to make sure she has warmth, and went to bed. And I woke up in the middle of the night with this tiny being on my chest. Here she was already a few days later, 4 days old. When she crawled all the way up in the bed, she was less mobile than she is in this video, and you know, eyes were barely open, and she could barely crawl, yet she had made it all the way up to my chest. I must have been also a deep sleeper, which I didn't realize at the time. But what I did is I ran to the kitchen to heat up some milk for her, but turned out she didn't want any milk. She really just needed to hear a heartbeat and to kind of lie on my chest and feel the rhythm of going up and down and up and down. And the way you can see her little lungs now going to in the video. Now, of course, this notion of both the outer and inner rhythm of our life is something that has been studied extensively in different ways, and we recognize it in many other aspects of our lives, particularly though also music. And I'm thinking in this case of Glenn Gould, and I always wanted to, if you ever listen to him playing the Goldberg variations, I always wanted to listen to the Goldberg variations played by Gould, but without the variations, because if you pay really attention, you can hear him hum, you can hear him sing his own song in parallel to it. And it's fascinating. He was very aware of it, everyone was very aware of it. And he made it clear that he couldn't stop. If he was to stop singing his own song while he was playing, he couldn't be playing. And in this conversation between Seiji Ozawa and Haruki Murakami, Ozawa just describes this moment of being both pure genius, but also pure freedom, because he's really doing something with his body while his mind is wandering completely around. And the way Ozawa had articulated was that his inner rhythms must be terrifically strong, because they couldn't be derailed but by the outer rhythms that were happening outside of him, which I thought was fascinating. So really what I'm trying to do as a project is learn from the organization and the buildup of the lungs, and build a space in which we can all, in which one could just rest on a floor, and then this floor starts moving up and down, basically replicating lungs movement. It's maybe an attempt to go back to become, you know, little beings again on you know, mother's chest, or really just trying to find that inner rhythm and try to sync up our rhythm. The floor, the quote unquote lungs would be yawning at times, they would be laughing, they would be going up and down and just breathing regularly. In parallel to that, we'd also be playing, or in addition to that, at one point we'd start hearing Glenn Gould play the Goldberg variations. And really the attempt would be for the lungs then to replicate his own breathing rhythm. And maybe we just get to fly a little bit on Glenn Gould's wings doing so. It's really this is what makes the project both uncomfortable in many ways for me, way out of my comfort zone in terms of trying to do things that I studied architecture in Romania, and one of the things the professors used to say is, you're only ever going to build brick houses, so you really have to know how to build a brick house. So I'm very thankful for learning how to build a brick house, but this is the furthest away from a big house that you can possibly imagine. But the search that I'm after here is something that's really tries to bring the essence of it down to the very minimum, to this very kind of basic component, and to thaw some of the numbness that we're experiencing and uncovering the fragile. I think today, in the last weeks, or not just today, in the last weeks, we've all uncovered a little bit more of the fragile and the vulnerable and the sensible in us, and we probably recognized how numb we can be because of our daily life rhythms. Maybe to end the description of the project, part of the title was inspired by a quote by Marcel Duchamp. In the afternoon interviews with Calvin Tompkins, Calvin Tompkins asked him what he has done since he had quit art. And Duchamp said, "Oh, I'm a breather, I'm a respirator. Isn't that enough?" And it's something that I always come back to. Of course, it turns out that Duchamp has been working quite productively, in addition to being a breather. But I think there's something there that is very important in terms of just taking the time to breathe and just taking the time to be, as maybe banal as it seems, but really understanding that that's all we are in many ways. On that note is, I think this notion of the breather or breathing or just having a little bit of space to take in the simple things around us is something that is a recurring theme in my project. But I realized also that part of how I got there was really sometimes by doing the far opposite. So one of the best things that I feel I did for my own work was really not work. And this was after coming out of that surgery and after dealing with the whole cancer experience. And going back home in Romania, I went in the woods, spent 2-3 months just reading, writing, going through the forest is one of the photos that I took then that really stayed with me. And I always try to look back at it. But it's funny because I think the most growth, both intellectually and emotionally, happened on personal level there. And that period that was not dedicated to any productive, literally productive way of moving my practice forward, in retrospect was the single best thing that I've done for my practice. And I'm saying that partially because I think we're under similar pressures today, the pressures to be productive, while we're also experiencing something that is bigger than us and something that is a fundamental, a dramatic change, both to us as individuals and the world at large. And maybe productivity is not the typical productivity is not the best way to take this in or to process it or to acknowledge what we're experiencing. Of course, the ability to do something like this is a huge luxury. One of the first projects that I've done after that experience was a competition entry. I was glad to be invited. I was honored to be invited by MoMA PS1 to do the Young Architects Program competition. And I did a project called Seriously Fun. If you're familiar with MoMA PS1, the Young Architects Program is asking for a place for shade, seating, and water. It's a funny brief in many ways, but for these courtyards that host every summer these huge parties where the entire youth of New York is gathering. If you ever want to get a pulse of youth, you go to one of those, you're invariably going to feel old, which is really a great feeling in many ways because you get a sense of next waves. But what I knew I wanted to do at the time is I wanted to use the project as an opportunity, or I think what I realized at the time too was I wanted to see if I can use project as an opportunity to connect with people that I was interested in, other practitioners or architects or artists. So I reached out to Akane Moriyama. We had met briefly in a workshop. She's an architect she's an artist, excuse me, who has a background in architecture. This is one of his projects. This is another one. But there's really fantastical projects, really just with fabric. So I asked her if she wanted to do the project together with me, and I'm very glad she did because we really had a lot of fun. So what was important to us in doing the project is that we conceive of something that is within the budget, and you need to know that the project has been historically plagued by an incredibly limited budget considering the amount of space and people it was catering to. But in the same time, we wanted for it to cater really to that youth, to people coming there and having a party, and to the young spirit of PS1, where PS1 is a lot less corporate than MoMA, but also just more, it feels more improvised, more alive in many ways. So we wanted to double down on that and create something that's seriously immersive, inviting, participatory, visceral, teasing, colorful, playful, reactive, engaging, responsive, and simply just fun. So can you double down on fun? How does one do that? This was really our quest to ourselves. So what we decided to do is to do a large-scale cubic grid, a cubic textile grid, that we suspended off of the walls of the MoMA PS1 courtyard. They're suspended by supported by really thin, very basic steel wires. And they were hosting a series of mobiles, these structures like this, that invited play and interaction. This is the model shot that shows the fabric in the 3 different courtyards. So every interaction between the mobile and the fabric creates these ripples in the cloud, which we were thinking of as these new lines of communication. We liked the idea that there was an unpredictable element to this that just created all sorts of serendipitous encounters And we were really hoping to create a suspension of normal social life and give people a different way of interacting, of coming together. Some more model shots that shows these mobiles and potential moments of interaction. What we call the social life of objects of these quote unquote mobiles, they're very abstract and they were nothing in themselves. We call them food for imagination. And that was important because they needed to be a tease. They couldn't be prescriptive, but in terms instead they were a tease, basically just inviting people to act on them, to climb on them, to stretch, to sit, to jump, to do whatever they wanted, but to interact, which was a personal decision, in a way stimulating one's imagination and really just offering themselves up as an invitation. This was inspired by looking at a lot of studies of informal forms of play. This is the jiggle rail. These are photos from Torino in the 70s, if I'm not mistaken. So we're basically boiling them down to these very, very simple shapes, abstract, that yet could be engaged or interpreted in different ways. This could be a seat for 3 people, but it could also be seen as a ladder or something to jump on. Now, the textile grids in the 2 main courtyards, they were made out of just 2 colors. It's always yellow and blue in this case, and yellow and orange, as you can see here in the back. It's the same yellow. What's fascinating, though, in working with fabric, and it's actually quite difficult to work in fabric, turns out, is that because it's a very straightforward grid, depending on how you move, the perception and the color of the very same space changes constantly. In addition to that, the sun, the humidity, the wind that enables the fabric here to just kind of blow in the wind, flow, sorry. All these elements, the sun, the humidity, the clouds, the wind, the movement of people, the amount of people in a space, every single element impacts your perception, and your own movement through the space impacts the perception of the installation, which we were really interested in. So every single time you're perceiving the installation, it's a unique moment in time, and no 2 people have truly the same experience with it. So this kind of constant reevaluation of what the installation is or what it does was something we're also particularly interested in. These are a couple of model shots that shows the same installation during a cloudy day or on a sunny day, that shows a little bit of those extremities, or the other courtyard, which is green and blue in just 2 opposite directions. It's really hard to work with fabric, partially because when we, as architects, as we do models, it's hard to then do fabric at different scales. So we use the real fabric actually in the 1:50 scale, which is quarter scale. But we also did a 1:2 model, and this is a 1:2 model of the same grid, just using yellow and orange. And you can see, although it's just 2 colors, the amount, the shades, and the kind of endless overlays and just shades that are created by this very simple structure is really something that we're quite interested in. That's Akane over there. We did this mock-up and kind of tested it in different light configurations, the same grid from different perspectives. That gives you a little bit of a sense of how something quite simple can be incredibly potent in terms of its effect. We also did one last thing. There's a tiny courtyard where what we wanted to do was create the entire courtyard, turn it into a hammock, so people had to lie down on their back in order to experience it. And the fabric installation above was the only instance where you had all 3 fabrics intersecting. And this is a model shot of those 3 colored fabrics, and just shows how all of a sudden you have completely unique colors that you couldn't experience in any of the other courtyards. In this section, you can see how that courtyard was looking comparable to the section of the main courtyard with the mobiles. The textile is very simple nylon textile. We're looking at very light, very easy to find in very bright colors. We also wanted to claim and take over the MoMA as one wall, and just by adding 3 layers of each of color on top of it, allowing it to kind of play in the sun and change with the weather and the time of day and the time of night. And we also were interested in repurposing the fabric, and there were all sorts of different ideas on the table, including making totes. I still have one, which is really nice. It's a very simple project in many ways, but it took an amazing group of people to bring it together. Incredibly thankful to everyone, everyone listed here. But I also want to show you some of the other things that happened that never made the cut. One of the first ideas we had was actually to make a giant hammock over the entire party where people could just climb up and really experience some of the fabric at play. So this is how the hammock would come over the crowds, and people would just be able to climb up on it and kind of hang out here over the DJ set. I'm sure there's huge liability issues involved in that. Some of the model shots. But we also looked at more complex forms and tried to find ways in which we could experiment with fabric. Again, a very different new material to me. I had never worked in, well, I had worked once before in fabric actually, for the worms we did for the new museum. We worked in paper as trying to simulate the forms. We did mock-ups. This is in the courtyard, Oana studying different ways in which we can play with the fabric. And we did a 1-to-2 mock-up again also before committing to something that's as simple as the grid. It oftentimes takes me a long while to draw to come back to either the initial or to a very simple idea. Once we decided on the grid, we had to do a 1/4 scale model to test some of those ideas. This was the first model we did. From there, we were very interested also in the representation of people, and I'm sure you know architecture is a huge problem with that, where very often these crowds are, the crowds are not being done justice to. So what we wanted to do is use an abstract way of representing people, and we did all these little wire people that we had a lot of fun with. This was the rock star. But you can really imagine each of them having their own personality. We did a lot of studies for the mobiles too, even if they seem, a circle might seem very incredibly simple or obvious maybe. Some of the previous studies had involved a lot more complicated things. All of that to say, to eventually kind of bring us to our final design, and this is a model shot that shows the conditions in both main courtyards and 1-to-2 mock-up in the sun and how it changed with that. But one thing that I wanted to mention, what was interesting, it was the first time I committed in a project in exploring the notion of play. And play is interesting if you pay attention to it, because it's next to impossible to define, and I invite you to try to do so. It's actually really incredibly difficult. And one of the definitions that we came across, and it was one of those catalogs from the 60s, was that play is to create, to discover, to experiment with one's culture. And I think that represented the best, in best terms, and in most clearly what we are trying to achieve with this installation. But I think this also makes a very strong case for why play is necessary and needed today more than ever. And I'm probably going to keep saying today more than ever, but I think it's absolutely true, because our culture is what's at stake truly today. A more maybe traditional project in many ways, or more architectural, more familiar, is the Longhouse that I'm really excited about. I've been working the last year on it. And it's a project in Canada in this incredibly beautiful landscape, very surreal setting. And the house is over here. There's an existing structure on site. Really beautiful. It's a natural reservation, so you're actually super limited with where you can build. We're very restricted, and the existing house is on a ridge. What's exciting too, you don't see any other built structures from the main property, and you're because it's all natural reservation, it's not gonna happen either. So we're only allowed to build on this ridge line, and that's the existing house. And what's fascinating about doing single-family residential, it's very intimate on the one hand, and you get to know someone really well, and it's really exciting. You're getting on a journey with whoever you're designing the house for. But on the other hand, houses also reflect, really they take on our personalities, and they really reflect the strangest thing, our own peculiarities, and everyone has strange things. In this particular case, so this was a house that was found on site, and just to give you a sense, this is how the handrails on the inside looked like. I don't think I want to know what was happening there. I thought it was quite hilarious. So we're demoing that house just in case there are any questions, but we are keeping the elements that are powerful or still work well, and that is particularly the the strong concrete walls and the foundations and some of the steel structures. So if this is the ridge line on that site, what we wanted to do is the orientation of the house is north-south. So we wanted to know, and the view is spectacular altogether. So what we knew is we didn't want to differentiate between spaces and give very specific views to specific rooms. But instead, because it was impossible to create a hierarchy, so we wanted to do the opposite, to kind of make a very democratic situation, which speaks a lot to the owners of the house. And we wanted to make sure that every single space is able to experience both sides and both views. In order to make sense of a 360 view, we introduced this wall that does a few different things, but one of its main purposes is to frame the views. Similarly, in which, you know, because it's a completely open-ended space, you sometimes are unable to see the little moments that are happening in the landscape around you. So this big wall over here is allowing some of those moments to be framed. In the same time, the wall, what I keep referring to it as the wall, has thermal abilities where it absorbs the heat from the southern side and releases it towards the north. And it also holds all the entire infrastructure of the house. It's made, the main structural elements are contained there, but also the wet spaces, the kitchens, the infrastructure, heating, and so on and so forth. And this gives you a sense, for the plan, or how we ended up. We basically applied the module on top of the length of the house, and used basically this entire linearity to create different intimacies and different levels of privacies. So on the far left side, we have the living area where there's a living room, a kitchen, a dining room. Then there's the deck and the pool, which needed to be protected by the house because of the incredibly strong winds that can happen. And on the far right side, there's the sleeping quarters, where there's a small spa, which also serves as a bathroom for kids and guest room, and then the master wing on the left side. This was one of the very early concept images. There's also a very cute dog involved, so we wanted to make him justice and also give him a space to feel well in the house. But this speaks to the intent of the wall framing views. The house is long, that's why we call it the long house, almost too long to fit on a single sheet. This is how our sheets look. So here you see the first half of the house continued below. It's around 289 feet, if I'm not mistaken, including the additional exterior portions of the wall, which is insane in many ways, but also pretty amazing. This is what we keep of the existing house, a basement with a garage through which you enter, and then this is how the wall looks at the top level. What you're going to notice, there's all sorts of operations happening in this wall, the main circulation going downstairs. There's a pizza oven, but it also is being interrupted with some of the larger frames in the dining and living room, where you need space for more people to gather. And then it becomes increasingly more intimate in terms of what it does towards the living quarters. To give you also a sense of how I typically work is very, very much through model making. This is just a series of models at different scales. This was the very first model, which was a concept model that you've seen a little bit earlier, and things always jump around. So the pool was here, then it became in the middle. So from here, we went to schematic design model, which is over here. From there, we went to the design development model over in the back. We jumped in further up in scale. This is just a third of the house. Where we started adding materials and testing also furniture and different layouts. And really funnily enough, the final model of the house currently lives in this small 3D printed model that does it most justice. These are some of the views that we were exploring. Some things have slightly changed since, but the main idea is still very much the same. Here's a fireplace in the wall, a frame of the landscape behind. But this also shows you how if you move through the hallway, or through the what we call the main gallery, you can experience the framing in different directions, different moments. So over here, you would have a big dining table or dining room, but next to it, you can have a more intimate bar area or DJ area. And there's a constant kind of in and out between big spaces and smaller spaces. This is where the kitchen lives, next to the dining on the other side of the wall, and then the living over here. The wall is kind of becoming an important part, but not just an infrastructural one, but also an experiential one. By the pool particularly, and in the living quarters too, we spend a lot of time in conceiving of these windows and openings, which are very much tailored to very specific instances. This is what we call a privacy window right around the jacuzzi and the spa, a window from which you can look out only from the pool. This is a desk that one can use in order to read a book, and another one becomes a ledge that allows you to take the view in and or also just see what happens in the pool or jump into the pool too. Showing, these were earlier studies, so there might be some discrepancy there. And then these angles we're also using as a way to kind of capture light at different moments and capture the trajectory of the sun as it evolves. To kind of give you a sense of the extremity, this is how, this is the elevation of the house, and these are the side elevations of the same very long house. There's two more projects that I'd love to go over with you, time permitting. This is in my hometown in very different settings. And this is in my hometown in Reșița in Romania. This picture was taken sometimes in the 80s, I'm going to venture out to say. I grew up, and I was born and I grew up during communism. And what you see here is in downtown a big manifestation honoring Ceausescu and his wife. And the project itself is this line here that you see in the back. And what's interesting, as I mentioned, I grew up during Ceausescu's time, which meant every time we went in the classroom in the morning, we had to sing in his honor. This was him with Nixon, Carter, Queen Elizabeth. She was so young. It's really amazing to see that. North Korea. Mickey Mouse couldn't escape him either. But he basically went from this very popular person who was also revered as a god from a kid's perspective, to being shot or executed almost live on TV. Our revolution was called the first televised revolution. I'm not sure that that's necessarily true, but what that means is, as it happens, it's kind of in extremely terrifying and exciting moment at once to live through something like this, because overnight an entire country does not have an educational system in place. It does not have a government. It has nothing in place. But it's exciting too, because it means there's room for change, and things were so bad that things could only go better from there on. What it means for the economy, though, a lot of the industry had been built up in the 60s and 70s, and part of why Ceausescu was universally accepted by all the international leaders was he paid off his external debt. So if in the 70s there were a lot of industrial investments, in this case, this is the funicular being built at home. By the 80s, by the time he had paid off the external debt, the country was in a very different place, and the industry started falling apart in many ways too. This was during the construction at the beginning, when how the city looked when the funicular was built for the first time. It's a 0.5 kilometer long structure, and this is how it looks today. My parents live somewhere here, and this is the main downtown of the city. It's a city that is surrounded by these incredibly green hills, yet there's no direct access to them to experience them, which is really interesting and kind of backwards in many ways. And the other thing too is what the funicular used to do is it used to bring stones from the quarry all the way to the factory. So this structure here was built just in order to kind of shortcut the travel time of the stones to the factory. So meanwhile, after the revolution, the industry started dying off, of course, unfortunately. So that means it's something that we experience all over the world, including in the United States today. But that means the whole glory of a town is kind of falling apart. You have a lot of joblessness, and you still have these huge industrial structures being kind of ghosts of past times. In this case, you can see a wedding happening downtown with the background. We have our own little Hollywood sign head. This is what happens to the funicular, or happened to it, or this is how people were using it when I was growing up. When I was in high school, it kind of stopped working. I think it was working maybe 1 hour a day, and it would squeak, and it was rather terrifying. But what we would do in high school, partially because one needs to do stupid things in high school, we'd climb on the funicular because it gives you this unique, incredible perspective over the city. This is more extreme. I'd never recommend doing that, but you are on a, let's say, 8 feet wide structure that has 100 feet drop. Kids also run on the net that was there to kind of capture some of the things that were falling off the carriages, which I could never recommend, which is also incredibly terrifying. But all of this to say that the structure is still incredibly present, but right now it's a ghost of a formerly glorious past, and it still has that nostalgia. So what I decided to do in architecture school, by the time I got to do my thesis, I didn't want to do just another, I don't know, museum, just another project after so many years of doing studio projects. And I wanted to do some to see if I can have fun with something and kind of also push the limit of what the architectural thesis might be kind of accepted at. So I did my thesis on the funicular, and this is one of the model shots from there, so you can see the structure here. And really what I proposed was just to try to transform it into a safe way of experiencing the city, and really as a conduit to the green hills around it. And really, instead of keeping it as something that is falling apart and it's a constant reminder of what we don't have anymore, transforming it and finding a way for it to allow the city to reinvent itself. So 2 years ago, the mayor from my hometown reached out and he said, "Oana, it's ours, let's make this happen," which is incredible. I was lucky because the hometown is a fairly small town, 100,000 people. But because of that, ever since the thesis, I will say every single mayor probably reached out at one point about the project or was aware of the project. But this time we actually really started working on it. So I partnered with a local architect, and Bogdan Dumitrescu, the project is the name of his office, who actually was my professor back in school, which is really amazing. And we started working and developing the project. And this is kind of a diagram that maybe encapsulates what it tries to do. On the one hand, it is about the rehabilitation of the funicular, this 0.5 kilometer long structure. On the other hand, though, it is very much about repurposing or giving access to the nature around us, and also just connecting the city on an infrastructural level so that you are able to navigate and reach certain neighborhoods or bike through the entire city without having to go through the main roads or where the cars are. On this hill, which is actually the northern hill, the Crosses Hill it's called, we connect to a couple of neighborhoods which are very inaccessible today, and with a high degree of poverty, but also with all the way downtown to the lower end or other end of the city. And then on the other side, on the other hill, there's currently concerts happening every summer here, but there's also a huge network of trails that take you to the mountains. There's the city is what you can think of as a through city, meaning people drive through this place in order to go to the mountains because it's the largest mountain in the immediate western part of the country. And as I mentioned earlier, the funicular is crossing over the downtown and some very important places. So City Hall is somewhere around here. There's a church, the House of Culture, playgrounds, a small park. And this is the original trajectory, the entire trajectory and all the pillars that were supporting the funicular. This is where the 0.5 kilometer long structure, funicular per se, is. And the project includes the rehabilitation of the entire, the length of the entire trajectory or the entire path that the funicular was following. This is a diagram showing how some of these paths can connect to trails, to the mountain, or to roads, or to different parts of the city. So turns out it's really hard to work on a project that's 0.5 kilometer long, or really hard to represent a project that's 0.5 kilometer long. So if the Longhouse was tricky. I think this one was even trickier. And I completely forgot to mention, I'm really embarrassed to do so, but the longhouse I'm working on together with Keith Burns, who's a very good friend of mine, and I'm really excited for him to be a partner in that house. I just completely slipped my mind, and I feel really bad about that. Back to the funicular now. So one thing that we did with the project, there's basically two levels. One is at the far top, where I showed some moments earlier, and the second one is at the bottom below the main beam. The top line, the top circuit is a very straight, very straightforward, very simple line. And the lower one does the opposite. It's very broken, it's narrow, and it's more for pedestrian. We encourage bicycle circulation at the top and pedestrian circulation. So more meandering and more specific viewpoints on the lower one. This is coming off the hill and getting onto the main, the top level of the funicular. You can see a zoom in of one of the sections, people biking at the top, walking on the lower part. Design-wise, there were a couple of things that were important to us and a couple of things that I really wanted to pursue. And one was the funicular itself is really powerful enough as an experience. Sitting there, being there on top of this structure, seeing the city around you is incredibly powerful and beautiful. So you don't need to do much to the place. So really our main agenda was to make it safe. And in terms of design, we wanted to make sure that the added elements don't turn it into something else, but speak the same language of the original, so that it feels almost like we found all these missing pieces of steel or from the previous factories, just offsets, and we were able to kind of put them all together. So almost that it feels like they were part of the initial design that never got built. So to put it bluntly, it was really about finding what's the minimum you need to do in order to maximize this already incredibly powerful effect. So the only other interventions in addition to the safe walkways are really elements of playground. So there's a slide which is rather terrifying because it takes you from the top 100 feet above the ground to the lower level, but when you get into it, you're not quite sure where you're being dropped out. And then there's smaller things here. This is where we're on the lower level, where just there's swings, or at times the net is made truly safely accessible, so you can just hang out and read a book or spend more time. This is how it's seen from below. You can see someone ziplining here. And this is also how it's seen from the city. There's an instance where there's a bungee jumping spot. This was, funnily enough, the only thing that was important to the mayor, and I think it was actually a very smart or very important point, because we have a lot of people driving through the cities, a lot of people doing extreme sports, skiing, mountain biking, and we needed this ultimately to be a point of attraction for people and really stimulate the local economy too. And then the last project that I want to talk to you about is a project that's very dear to my heart that I've been working on for 10 years. And I'm going to keep on talking about it because I think it becomes more and more relevant to the world around us. So the Plus Pool, you might have heard about it. Excuse me. The Plus Pool is floating water filtering a pool that we conceived of or thought of to live in the East River. It filters over 600,000 gallons of river water every day. It was conceived of as 4 pools, or it's a plus because it's essentially 4 pools. There's a kids pool, there's a lounge pool, there's a lab pool, and then there's a sports pool coming together into one. It's Olympic size, so you can also think of it as Olympic swimming pool cut in half and kind of rotated onto itself. Of course, it's also reminiscent of the Manhattan grid. And the reason behind a project like that is, as I think most New Yorkers can confirm, it's really easy to forget that when you live in New York or in Manhattan, that Manhattan is an island and that New York is surrounded by water. You kind of think of water as being as a big vacuum between boroughs more than anything else, rather than something to enjoy. Yet New York used to have a very active waterfront scene. These are just some etchings from 100 years ago, around 100 years ago, where which shows you the kind of life and the social life that was happening on the waterfront and how much fun people were having. ironically, with all this progress today, we can't afford to do that anymore. Partially because of pollution, but partially because also all these little red dots here. These are CSO, combined sewage overflows. And what it means essentially is that every single time it rains in New York, sewage is being dumped into the river. It's as simple and as terrible as that. So really what we wanted to do is really just reclaim the river and draw attention to something that's, one of the biggest issues of our coming century, and try to treat the rivers around us, the water around us, as something that we're privileged to have access to, rather than something that we neglect. The project came together as a group effort between 4 friends. It was Dongping Wong and myself, which were working as family at the time, and our friends Jeffrey Flankerin and Archie Lee Coates from the Office of PlayLab, who have an amazing office of what they call free ideas. So what we did, this was 2010, so 2 years after the financial crisis. It's something that I mention a lot because I guess we were in the midst of another one. But partially, as you know, there weren't many jobs at the time, and we were all just trying to find silver linings in the situation, but also make the most of the circumstances. So in this case, what we decided to do, we had this idea of the plus pool. We made a website, we made booklets and posters, and just send them to people, random people, architecture offices, engineering offices, universities, so on and so forth. And I don't think we could have ever predicted any of this, but basically overnight it blew up in our face. The website, of course, crashed, but there was a huge interest in it. And people were really excited by this, by a couple of renderings, which is really, really mind-blowing to us. Arup, one of the largest engineering offices in the world, called us. I think we hung up on them because we thought it was a prank call, and they said, no, we saw it online, we really want to talk to you. So it's really exciting. Eventually it made it all the way to the Letterman. I always joke that that's the moment where parents started being okay with us working on it. But I mean, what kind of amazing cultural cachet. So what we did with all this interest from people, when we put it out, I think, of course, we were hoping to kind of find a way to bring it to life. But I will also be honest and say we had no idea what we were getting ourselves into. So when we saw all this interest, we said, well, we have to now deliver, we have to do something. So what we did is we did 2 Kickstarter campaigns, the first one in 2011, the second one in 2013, and raised over $250,000, which is insane because we're essentially just 4 designers. And we used that money in order to prove concept and test the filtration. This was the first filtration test that we did at Brooklyn Bridge Park, got all this, all the tools from Columbia University, learned how to test everything there was to be tested in water. And this was the second filtration test, which was in river filtration. Here you can see the people from Perseg and Warfeld, the naval engineers that we're working on. It's a huge team that got together in order to make this happen. So we did, this was in 2014, where we did the in-water, river water, filtration testing. This is in the Hudson River. You can tell by the fact that the World Trade Center 1 is in the background. This is Greg, our water engineer, who's really awesome. And that was his office for an entire summer. So that's when we really got to work and really kind of tried to see what our filtration can do. I always say this particular diagram can be a little bit trying, or it looks a little bit fake almost because it's too promising. But basically you can tell the first 13 weeks were incredibly difficult. And then though we've hit jackpot, if we find the right combination, and this is a more detailed spectrum of how the data of the quality of the water looks like. So what you see, these huge red spikes here, it means every single time it rains, the bacteria in the river spikes. And after week 13, we're able to filter out a majority of the bacteria and bring it all down to pool standard. Now, in order to communicate things on Kickstarter, you need to find ways to learn to talk to, or you need to learn to talk about the project to different constituents, different people, non-architects, and really kind of make a convincing case for everyone to put their, to invest in it, essentially. So what we did here, we came up with this campaign of tiles where everyone, and even today, you can still very much buy a tile and support the project in such a way where by buying a tile, you feel that then is going to find its way to the on the pool. You can go and find your own spot, but you can see you can physically see the contribution that you made towards the project, which is a really beautiful way of getting invested. And people really had fun with it, and it was really incredibly heartening, and they still are. This is Kara Meyer, the soul of our organization, and what she's holding there is a very important piece of paper that says that we became a nonprofit in 2015. What happens if we formed a nonprofit because it is the only way to ensure that the project will be built to our vision and to the values that we are that we believe in. What happens, turns out that when you form a nonprofit, you need to do a lot of fundraising, and a lot of the fundraising happens through parties. We always have a summer pool party that's really fun. We partner with all sorts of artists. In this case, Mike Kelly, he designed swimsuits for us. But then there's also a fall gala. In this case, we had Connor Dwyer join us at the very first fall gala, which is really exciting. He's a gold Olympic medalist, always has the medal on him. Really amazing. And last fall, we had the gala at the pool room in the Seagrid building, which is incredibly exciting. Here is Joshua David, one of our amazing board members, who's the founder of the Highline in New York, enjoying the synchronized swim happening in the tiny pool at the Seagram. It was a lot of fun and really incredible to be able to be in the Seagram building, in the pool room, 10 years down the road, 9 years down the road. Really exciting. It's also, the project is also conduit to all sorts of collaboration. This was a collaboration with Cindy Sherman, where she made a floaty for us, which you can buy in the MoMA Design Store. And other collaborations between Cindy Sherman and Virgil Abloh, for example. And this is one of the most amazing slides to me, and I keep coming back to it, and it's hard to read and it's impossible to read, and in a way that's the point, because every single name there represents someone who put their time and money and energy behind this project, which is incredibly heartening. It's hard to run a nonprofit, but every time the energy gets low, we come back to that. The other thing that we realized, a project like this can take a lot of time to come truly to life. So we wanted to be ready by the time we're in the river, ready to fulfill some of the promises that we made to ourselves. So what that means is we partnered with NYCHA, the New York Housing Authority, and started a swim program. So every summer you can buy one tile, and a kid from one of the housing projects in New York gets to learn how to swim. Here we buy everything for them, any apparel, anything they need. We had the t-shirts designed also by Mike Kelly in this instance. And I will say it's one of the most amazing things. You go on the first day and they're all shy and nervous about the water, and 2 weeks later you can't get them out of the water and they just jump around like crazy. It's really heartening. In addition, we do installations and try to raise awareness about the conditions that the river is in. This was an installation that we did last fall, it was up between October and December. And the lights of the, it's a little bit smaller than the pool would be, but it's a marker that kind of shows you that you could technically be swimming here. And the lights reflect the quality of the river water, meaning if it's blue, you could swim. If it was pink, it means the water was not for swimming. I'm just going to wrap it shortly. The city issued an RFI, request for interest on the project, which we submitted, and we're part of the conversation with the city now. But what I want to say is what's extremely difficult about a project like this, and why it's hard to do things that haven't been done before, is there's no pathway of how you bring something like this to life. So this is just a chart that we look at, and that we try to, it's kind of a choose your own adventure a little bit, in the sense of trying to really replicate how can we work with the city in order to permit something that hasn't been done before, because it's not a building and it's not a boat. So what we did invariably with the Plus Pool, the Funicular, in a similar manner, is inadvertently, if a typical project starts with a policy in place and the client then gets the funding together, which ultimately leads to a design that reaches a public, we flipped the whole process and we started with the design that, and we're now in the process of finding the client, so to speak, so finalizing the site in conversations with the city, and hope to ultimately lead to policy changes. But the more we think about it, I think, and especially what we're experiencing today, I think it's important that that process is less linear and has less opposite ends, but actually comes together into one. And it's more of a fluid thing, meaning the design process can start anywhere, should be starting anywhere, sometimes from the public, sometimes from policy. But that's particularly important today because if you are quarantined or isolating and you live next to a park or a public space, you instantly viscerally understand the value of public space. So that's something that's important. And I wanted to end on that note, stop share, to end on that note and just say maybe a couple of words about this moment that I'm going to shut up in a second, but a couple of words on this moment that we are in. What I find amazing, it's an incredibly difficult moment by all means, but you can sense people's vulnerability and sensibility, and that's really heartening and inspiring in incredible ways. And really my hope is that moving forward, we are taking that sensibility and applying it to our designs and allowing them to make the cities better, to make the cities healthier, and to really help us fight isolation. I hear a lot of talk about that, but I think it's our responsibility to build new collective instead of furthering this moment of isolation, and really in many ways just kind of building ourselves room to breathe a little bit more. So I know there's a lot of questions that have been screened here for me. So Paige, if we still have time, I'd be happy to answer some of these. Okay, so first one, what is the process of design that you follow, whether it is an installation or more traditional work of architecture? I think the first thing I always do is research or think. I try to suspend design as much as possible. We all have a gut reaction, and the moment you're being given an exercise, you already want to design. But the first intuition isn't always necessarily the best. So I try to put that a little bit off and try to truly learn a little bit more. Hear more from the client, make sure I hear and understand them, but also learn more about the project itself. And from there, I actually go into writing, and it's just writing for myself. It's not stuff I necessarily ever show to anyone, but the writing is a way for myself to hold myself accountable and to really lay out, okay, what is it truly that I am interested in pursuing this project? Why am I doing it? Why am I spending this time in it? And what's the potential? What would make me most excited about it? And honestly, that's something that I always keep coming back to further down the road, because the initial moment of excitement is what needs to keep the project going further down the line too. Question number 2. I would like to ask, how could you get commission for all these projects, especially that your way of thinking is not common for clients? That's a good question. You shouldn't ask me. You should ask the clients. I mean, MoMA was so not all of these are commissioned. So the Funicular was a project that I did by myself as my thesis, and then shared it with the world, and then the world came back to me in a way. The Plus Pool, the same. It wasn't a commission. We just kind of spent our own time and money on it, and then got the whole team of people together to get us moving. But I think it's important at times not to wait to be commissioned, because no one's going to come and ask you to do the world's first water in floating pool. And it's important, I think it's our responsibility as designers to put things out there and to tease the world and to show the world what design can do, because oftentimes the people who are in a position to commission, they don't necessarily see those things always coming. So the breathing installation, for example, that's also an initiative and really just a solo pursuit that I'm interested in. People are asking about help, which is very nice. You can always email me your portfolios. How can play infiltrate the office or more formal environments, or is it confined to residences, installations, and playgrounds? I think offices, especially recently, in recent years, have been absolutely trying to integrate play, I would say in a too literal way at times. So if you look at the offices that are happening, the office designs that are happening in Silicon Valley, whether it's the Adobe headquarters or even the Google, the Facebooks, they all have, they're play is part of their ethos, but I think it's also play at a very kind of literal level. And I'd be interested to explore for those elements to be explored also at the kind of just deeper level, which ties into what it means is, you know, this whole policy of open offices that's been debunked, and those type of work environments aren't necessarily well. So I think it also has to do maybe this integrating this notion of play into office with how we think of the work. My whole ethos is to try to make the work the play. The moment I'm struggling, the moment I don't want to do something, I'm going to do it terribly. So I think maybe then the most non-architectural way, most direct way, I think it has to do with the attitude that towards something that we do. And even if it doesn't seem palatable, to find ways in which we're doing it. I was supposed to press the answer live button, I think, which I didn't do, but I'll just keep reading the questions. What advice do you have for young designers in college? If today proves anything, is that no one can give you any advice, or that no one is in control. There's no adults in the room. But that might be terrifying, but it's exciting too. You know, this is your story, and I think you as students right now are in the position to make the most of the circumstance that we're in. That might seem counterintuitive, but I think that's absolutely true. If I was to say something, is not to try to find answers, because nobody can give you any answers right now, but instead to make sure you keep asking the right questions, or you're looking for the right questions to be asked. How do you handle time in your projects? Have you ever had a situation where the project's time frame controlling your design decision? Absolutely, always. Invariably, I feel as creative people, we need sometimes that deadline, right? Like we need that moment of that just kind of puts us into place. It's interesting because many projects too, creative projects, they could never end. If you wouldn't have a deadline, you could always revise things and refine things, because too, as a human, too, as a person, you evolve and your interest can change and the world around you changes. So you always work under the time pressure, but I think that's a good thing. So I try to always, what I like doing in my office is having parallel projects that work at different speeds. So an architectural projects like the house is going to take 1 or 2 years, when another project like an installation or something done in fashion is going to be way faster. So I like to kind of tag team between the two, but I think sometimes not having time is really good. What happened to Simba? Very good question. Thanks, Ed. Simba we actually tried to ship Simba to, this was when internet wasn't, there was one computer in town which had internet. So, but we got in touch with people in the US who had special food, who sent us special food for baby lions, because there is such a thing here. Eventually we weren't able to send Simba to the US, but we found a really good zoo in Romania, and my mom and I drove her up there. And I will say, animals always sense when something's happening. If you have a cat or a dog, they always know you're leaving, you're coming, they feel things. But Simba was feeling things, like she could tell things in ways in which I didn't experience that with any other animal. In the beginning, I think my mom was still calling that place at least once a week, if not once a day, to check in on her. And she's, as far as we know, she's still there and still good. She also had cubs, which she rejected, which was a little bit sad, but apparently it's common at the first litter. Ahmad, I'm an architecture student from Indonesia. Okay, sorry, it's looking for the question. The case of the coronavirus pandemic or COVID is enough to make the whole country afraid, even changing all living systems. Especially at this time, we can see changes caused by the environment in several major cities in the world, one of which is China, Korea, and Jakarta. However, if we compare this with the case of the virus spreading so fast, it causes all systems to be chaotic and requires a country to replan or reorganize everything from transportation, social activities, mobility, economy, and so on. So it has an impact on long-term planning. So how does the resource person respond to this as an architect? or planner to make innovations in the form of responses to the COVID-19 pandemic case into a theoretical concept and design of human residential buildings in the future? I mean, it's a very good and important questions that I think in many ways I don't know that we can quite answer it, because what's happening right now is bigger than us and we're still processing. And we also are not quite sure where it's going yet. When you're in the middle of something, it's hard to address it. But I think it raises a lot of good questions like you brought up, where the main question is what kind of fundamental changes to our lives or lifestyles do we need to do in order to I don't know if it's in order, well, I guess first and foremost, in order to make sure we don't find ourselves in the same place again. But two, also, where does our responsibility as designers live? And that happens, I think, at very different spectrums. And it can happen, I truly believe that, you know, you can have impact even on two people by doing a small installation or by doing small projects, but also at the large scale. I don't think everything has to happen at large scale, and everything, the work at small or large scale is equally important in many ways. But outside of that, I think the questions are actually happening at the higher and more important level, and we really have to, I hope, my biggest hope is in a way that we don't just go back and pretend this was a blimp, but really find a new way to just celebrate life a little bit more, to maybe work a little bit less or make that less of a centrality, to find ways not to depend so much on money that if the whole economy is paused for 2 weeks, lives fall apart, to make sure that communities in poverty or people of color aren't the first ones to be suffering. There's so much work that can be done, and a lot of it is I think very, very literal and obvious too. I just hope after this we go back and learn from this experience. I hope this answers it. How does drawing help and inform your design? Did you always give it a lot of importance in your project in comparison with processed images, and do you draw every day? I don't consciously draw every day. I probably write every day. I do squiggle a lot and as my students will confirm, or people working with me, that my sketches aren't necessarily the best and they always look a little bit messy. I think writing was always big for me, and also collaging. But I guess drawing is really just one of the tools that I look down to. I have discovered, you know, in school I didn't used to draw as much, and I discovered as I started working more and more that drawing is an important part of practice. It's really just a way of thinking, and it allows you to do things that digitally you can't, or you think with your digital brain in different ways. So I try to incorporate actually analog and just drawing with a pen or drawing on a drawing tablet in all my projects, because I think there's something that's very authentic and true there, which I really enjoy. At the beginning, Tina, at the beginning of your lecture, you spoke about adapting to a new normal after overcoming health challenges. I was wondering if you can elaborate on how you have continued to adapt and recalibrate after different challenges throughout your practice. I mean, in many ways, to be honest, I always try to look back at the lessons that I learned then, because it was incredibly visceral and impactful of an experience. And the other thing that happens if you're in a moment like that, things are incredibly clear. What matters and what doesn't is weirdly obvious and very easy in a way to see. And that's something that I always keep coming back to. Honestly, when it comes to my practice, or really to my life in general too, the main question that I keep coming back to is very banal, it's very basic, and it's how do you choose to spend your time? Really, what do you want to do with the next hour? And if it's something that maybe it reflects itself in just saying no to a lot of things, and just pursuing things that I am truly interested in, versus trying to get rid of all the things that are being projected onto me or that I feel I'm expected to be doing. So trying to make sure I live up to my expectations and not the environment's expectations, which can be hard at times, even if we don't acknowledge that. Anna, what would you say is the best way for young designers without a background in architecture to get involved in these interactive, immersive projects? It's a world I've always been fascinated with, but unsure what or where the best place to begin is. I'm always fascinated by doing the things where there isn't a prescriptive or singular way of doing it. So my suggestion is just reach out to people you are interested in, reach out to whoever the projects that you're interested in, always aim high, and try to start a conversation. In a way, people aren't looking always in the creative worlds. They're not always looking for a degree as they're looking for ideas. And they're looking to understand how someone is thinking. And they're looking for passion, and they're looking for drive. And I think that's what it comes down to. So on the one hand, it has to do with learning, and learning to what one's skills is, perfecting them, being able to bring them to the table. But on the other hand, is really just knocking on doors and starting conversation. And I'm getting a flag here from Paige that I have one more question. So the next one is going to be the last. I'm sorry for everyone else. Apparently I talk too much. Oliver, how do you regard feasibility when you're entering a design competition? So I haven't done competitions in quite a while actually, and the only competitions that we used to do as family, and the only competitions we ever did were competitions that were real and that had as an end goal to build a project. If that wasn't the case, we weren't interested in, let's say, theoretical competitions or competition of ideas, because we just wanted to build. So it was the straightforward way. And today I'm only doing invited competitions or paid competitions, just because I don't see the point or have the time really to just offer my time for free for other people's ideas. But I think also that if someone is truly interested in your idea, they're gonna commit to it and find a way to make it happen. And if they're not that interested in working with you, then what's the point to begin with? It's a little bit pragmatic. I want to thank you all. We ran out of time, unfortunately, but really appreciate you spending the time with me. I think time, as I said earlier, time spent in company is really precious these days, and I can't thank you enough. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope I answered some of your questions. And thank you.